Alright, hello again, this is Jeff Scott, and I have been talking to you about HTML5 and CSS3. The time has come to go into Chapter 9, which is the beginning of Section 2 of our book. And Chapter 9 is all about images. It begins in your book on page 321. In here we'll learn basic skills for working with images, advanced skills for working with images, and some related skills for working with images. So we want to be able to use HTML5 to include images in a web page, and CSS to help with image alignment and image floating. And if you don't know what that is, we're going to be talking about it in just a minute. Use the HTML5 figure and fig caption elements so that we're able to treat an image as a figure. Use HTML to create an image map, which can be used to link to more than one web page. List and describe the three types of images used with websites. Describe the proper use of the image element and its related CSS. Describe the use of the figure and fig caption elements with images. Describe the use of thumbnails, image rollovers, and image maps. And finally, describe the use of image editors and tools for creating what are called favicons. Now, here are the three main types of images that you work with. The first is, they're called Jpegs, and they could be a .jpg or a .jpeg. JPEG is an acronym that stands for Joint Photographic Expert Groups. Alright, these are typically the types of images that are used for photographs, and they can actually hold millions of colors. But if you decide that you want to compress a JPEG file, what happens is information from it might be lost, but the reduced image quality shouldn't be that noticeable. A GIF file, GIF is another acronym that stands for Graphic Interchange Format. And these are typically the types of things you'd use for logos and small illustrations, maybe some very simple animation. They can represent up to 256 colors. You don't lose information when you compress them, and they support transparency on a single color. Well, for a while, those were the two choices that you had, but then along came PNGs. PNG is another acronym that stands for Portable Network Graphic. They were designed to be a replacement for GIF files. Alright, compressed PNG files are a lot smaller than their GIF compressed counterparts, although no information is lost. They can represent millions of colors, alright, more like a JPEG, and they support transparency on multiple colors, whereas again, GIFs only support them on a single color. PNG files are supported by almost modern browsers and also by mobile devices. Here are some JPEG images, and ideally what you see there is the clarity of the images. Here's some GIFs. The clarity isn't as much. They're much simpler. Now, if you use an image tag, alright, this is the way that you should do it. In fact, let's just get off of this, and I'll leave that here, but I'm going to bring up my own little image tag. So let's add this. It's probably a little small right now, so let's make it about 22. So, I say image. The order in which I put these four things does not matter. But let's say I say source equal, let's say that I've got a picture of a bird, and it's a PNG file. Alright. I can put alternative text in there. Robin redbreast. Redbreast. And I can put in there a height and a width. Now I just made that up, but let's talk about what's in here. All right, because it'll explain those attributes that are up above. For a long time, the only attribute you had to put in there was this one, source. Now, since I'm saying source equals bird.ping, that assumes that the ping file is in the same folder as my HTML. Usually it isn't, so usually you're going to do something like this. In fact, let's be even a little more about this. Let's put each one of these things on its own line. Okay? All right, so I've got an image called bird.ping that's going to be in an images file. All right, the tag that goes with it, again, you used to only have to say the source, but today there's so many people who use browsers who are vision impaired that you put the alt tag in there so that a screen reader could say that, you know, it's a robin redbreast. And there's the height, the width and the height. So let me show you this. So if I went in here and I went into Google Images, and I'm going to put in here robin. A robin bird. Okay? So there's a robin. Okay? And I'm just going to grab one of these. Doesn't really matter which one. This one, the first one here is fine. So I'm going to do a file. And I'm going to save my link. I'm going to save the image. And I'm going to save it to my desktop. I'm working in Chapter 9, so I'm going to put it there. I'm going to create in here a folder that's called Images. All right. And in that folder, I'm going to save this. And instead of calling it download.jpg, I'm going to call it bird.jpg. All right. So there's my picture. You see, there it actually is, so you can see it. Okay. Now, when I save this picture, let me grab all this code right here too. Paste that in, so I've got to start here. All right, so I'm going to put a doc type. Of HTML, which we always put, and our HTML tag. And our head tag, remember that's for all information that does not appear on the page itself. There's our title, and we're going to call this Robin Image. Okay? We can end our head section then. Put in our body, end our body, and end our HTML. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to paste this in. So there's my image stuff. All right. Now, it would actually work right now, but I'm not sure exactly what the size of that image when I saved it, what that size was. So I'm going to check. So I'm going to come into Chapter 9, and in my images folder, it says the image folder is empty. Well, that isn't good. It should have been saved. Did I save it just in Chapter 9 and not in Chapter 9 images? Yep, there it is. So I'm moving it to my images folder. So I moved it, whoop, move it, there we go. Alright, so in my images folder I've got this. I don't want this thing. And if I take and put this over here, you can see that it's 258 by 195, way down to the bottom in the dimensions. So I want to change that to 258 by 195. So that becomes 258, and that becomes 195. Now, this is a real simple example, so there's not much on this page. So I'm going to save this to my desktop in Chapter 9, and I'm going to save this as our old index.html. So there it is. Now I'm going to run this, and it doesn't find it. Now think about why it doesn't find it. Okay, because it's on me. If we go back here, I put images / bird.ping. But is that what I called it? Let's look. See, it says the robin redbreast, so it gives me my alt tag. Chapter 9, images. It's bird.jpg, and I think I put bird.ping. See that? So I put the wrong extension in there. So if I refresh, there it is. That's all you got to do to add an image to a file. So one last time, the source, and if it's in a different folder, you've got to give it the path. The alternative text, which can be used for two reasons. You just saw one of them. And one of them is just in case you put the wrong file name or something else in there like I did, so that gave the alternative text. The other, again, is for people who are vision impaired, so it's something a screen reader could use. You don't have to put in the width and the height. If you do put in the width and the height, what that does, just so you're aware of it, the reason that you might want to put in the width and the height, because what that does is it kind of gives a heads up to the browser, and it says, hey, just so you know, this is the amount of real estate on the page that you're going to have to put aside. A width of 258 pixels and a height of 195 pixels. So you're just making it easier. All right? Now, what if I did this? What if I wanted to make this bigger? So I put 1258 here and 1195 here. All right? It worked, sort of. It made it the size I told it to, and it stretched the image. Some people do that, and that's very unprofessional. If I want to work and change the size of an image, there are all sorts of different tools that I can use in order to do that. I changed it back again so it's at its right size. So it's there. All right. But if I look here, if I want an image resizer, for example, there's a lot of stuff online that I can use. There are software packages, free ones and ones that you can buy also to resize images. So the bottom line is, rather than you just changing the numbers, which again you can do, but it looks really unprofessional if you do something like that. So I'd recommend against it. All right, let's continue on. So the height and width, yeah, they're used for sizing the image. Here's two image examples. I don't know if you get much more out of this than what I showed you, but notice, if you want to, you can take the height and the width and put it inside of CSS. I could have done that same thing. Would have been absolutely no problem doing that. All right. If you're going to do that, though, make sure, like we did here, because you might have multiple images, so have an ID. And really, small is a bad name for an ID. The ID should describe what it is you're trying to do, and to just say small really isn't very descriptive. All right. Images in a web browser. So let's make sure I'm not missing anything in the book here. Again, always call it an alt attribute. And if an image is just used for decoration, in other words, if there's no meaning at all to it, the alt tag can have an empty string. We talked about the height and the width, so there's nothing new there. All right. And that's basically what I just told you. Okay? All right. How to align an image vertically. If you use pixels, points, or ems to specify the value for the vertical image property, the image is raised if the value is positive and lowered if it's negative. If you specify a %, the image is raised or lowered based on the percentage of the line height. You can use margins, paddings, and borders with images just like with any other block element. All right. So this vertical align that you see right here, it's either a relative value or it's an absolute value or it's a keyword. But regardless, it determines the vertical alignment of an image. And you use that kind of in conjunction with the stuff that you see below here. Bottom aligns the bottom of the image box with the bottom of the box that contains anything adjacent to it. Middle aligns the midpoint of the image block, of the image box, with basically where with the midpoint of the block that contains it. Top aligns the top of the image box with the top of the box that contains it. Text bottom aligns the bottom of the image box with the bottom of the text in the containing block. And text top aligns the top. All right? So why do you want to do this? Well, here are some examples. Notice the difference on what's on the left and what's on the right. What's on the right, the web, phone, and fax on the to order now that's on the right, the text is centered in the center of the image, whereas otherwise it's on the bottom of the image. And it's not necessarily that the ones that are on the left are bad or wrong, okay? But most people would probably tell you that the ones on the right look more professional. Sometimes you need to float an image. And usually when you need to float an image, which we're talking about there, is we want an image, the text to flow around an image. So like this. Okay, there's an example. So when you do that, you can use a combination of float and clear. Float is a CSS keyword that determines how an image is floated. Okay, you can use it not only with images, but it's normally used with images. Possible values are left, right, and none is the default. If you float something and then you put something below it by default, it's also floated. So when you float something and if you want whatever's on the next line to stop being floated, then typically what you do is you put a clear statement in there. So clear is another CSS keyword that determines if an element that follows a floated element flows into the space left by the floated element. Here the possible values are left, right, both, and none. And none is the default. And they give you some examples here. But again, as always, you learn by doing. All right? And they show the code that's right here. All right, the HTML that's right here, along with the CSS that's right here, gives you what you see right here. All right? So again, you can use the same techniques to float an image that you use to float any kind of block element. All right? So those are pretty much the introductory skills for working with images. Now let's talk about some more advanced skills. Really, I think starting in HTML5, what you have now is typically what you use is you put your figures, your images go inside of a figure tag. And either above or below the image, and typically it's below, but it doesn't have to be, you put in what's called a fig caption tag. So the figure element is used as a container for anything that's used as a figure. Image, a table, whatever it happens to be. The fig caption element is used within a figure to provide a caption that describes the figure. It is optional. When you code it, it can be anywhere within the figure. So again, there's a lot of different things you can do with this. By default, the fig caption is an inline element. So you may need to change that. Remember that an inline and block element, an inline element does not have, all right, an inline element does not have a line before it and after it. Now, you can get the same results without using the figure and fig caption elements. You can do it almost straight in CSS, but the recommendation is not to do that. With HTML5, among other things that were added were the figure element and the fig caption element. They're semantic elements. By using them, it's much easier to tell that the image is used as a figure and that the caption applies to that particular image. Again, if you want to see, you've got examples, and then you get the code pretty much that goes with it. Okay? All right. Thumbnails. We'll talk about these in even more depth and breadth of coverage when we get to the JavaScript chapters later. But a thumbnail is a small version of an image that can be used for downloading the image faster and to save space. To create a thumbnail, you typically use some kind of an image editor for resizing the image. A thumbnail can be used as the image for a link, all right, that displays the page in a larger version. And again, if you've ever heard of light boxes, which again we will talk about in a later chapter, it's kind of what happens in there. A larger version of a thumbnail can be displayed on the same page by using JavaScript for what's called an image swap. And again, that'll be discussed in Chapter 15. You want to see some code examples, or the code example that did this. All right. So you click on which one? I think it's this one right here, the first one, and that's what comes up. Maybe it's not that one. In fact, I think it's this one here. That one is going to give you this. So here's the HTML for a page that contains thumbnails. All right. Not only can you use thumbnails, but as an example, you can use rollovers. And with a rollover, the idea is when you take your mouse and roll it over an image, it changes. Now you're not going to see it here, but let's talk about an example. At least example where I've seen it already used. All right. I've already gone out to sites that talk about dietary type of information, and they might have a before picture and an after picture of somebody. So they show the before picture. If you take your mouse and you roll it over the image, it shows the after picture. And if you take the mouse out again, it goes back to the before picture. This is a pretty simple technique, all right, that you can use for image rollovers. So the image gets changed when the mouse rolls over it. One way to do it is to use background images and then the hover pseudo class. And when you do it this way, the first image is applied to the block like a paragraph element, and the second is when the mouse hovers over it. All right, that's pretty much what you see in the example right here. You can also end up doing that in code, just so you know. All right? All right. Image maps. Now, you may do an image map, you may not do an image map, you may have seen an image map already. Let's take a look at an image map, just in case you have never seen one. And we'll put in here image map of the human body. All right, it's kind of a popular one, so I'll click here. And I can usually take my mouse and then click in different areas. And when I click in that area, all right, this isn't a good example. Let's do an image map of the U.S. All right, bring that up. Typically, when you have an image map and you use something like this, and hopefully this one will be set up. If I take my mouse and I put it over Wisconsin and I click, I would get the home page of Wisconsin. All right, it looks like this isn't working, but I just wanted you to get that idea. All right, so I've got image maps here, but they're not working image maps. There you go. So we clicked on the state of Wisconsin, and we get kind of a county map for the state of Wisconsin. Okay? And most people can take a look at that, and it makes at least some sense to them, all right, when they take a look at it. Now, when you work with these, what they talk about right here Notice first it says the attribute of the image element that identifies the related map element. Well, useMap identifies the related map element. The value of this attribute is the value of the name attribute for the map element that's preceded by a pound sign. The name element provides the name for the map. The href specifies a relative or absolute URL that identifies a page that will be displayed when the area is clicked. The shape is the shape you can use. You can use a rect for rectangle, circle, or you can use poly, which is a polygon. So if you've got something that is kind of a different shape, that's typically what you'll use. Coords basically discusses coordinates. And their values of these indicate the shape and locations of the area. 2 sets of XY coordinates are required for a rectangle. All right, 3 are required for a circle. And a series of XYs are typically required for a polygon. So again, you can use the map and area elements, and typically you use those to provide clickable areas on your image map. Those clickable areas are known as hotspots, and the coordinates are relative to the upper left corner of the image and are measured in pixels. Just a couple other related skills for working with this stuff, and I'm on page 338 right now. All right, so the author talks about what happens if you need to get and size your own images. Okay, so typical editing options include changing the size of the image, the type, or the quality of the image, controlling the animation of an animated GIF file, saving an image with transparency or a matte, getting the coordinates of an image map. So there are different editors that you can use in order to do this, including Photoshop and GIMP. GIMP is a great one. I love using it. I mean, I've used it before. It's fairly easy. It's fairly intuitive. It's not going to always work exactly the way that you think it's going to work, but it pretty much does. If an image contains transparency, if an image with transparency is displayed over a colored background, the background color shows through. If an image with a transparent color is displayed over the colored background, a matte of the same color will help the image blend into the background. Okay. So there, that example is without transparency, and the other one uses a matte, the one on the right. So you can see it looks a little bit nicer. All right, how to get images and icons. The big thing about this is if you never go out to a website and just grab other people's work because it looks neat. You can start by going out and Googling free images, etc., and there are several sites that you can go to. That said, all right, with many of these sites, they will ask that you give attribution or something like that. In other words, you can use the images as long as you give credit requested by the person who actually owns them. As mentioned here, there's share alike, where you can distribute the image based on the license that governs the work. There's non-commercial, where you can use the image for non-commercial purposes only, so you're not basically trying to make money. And there's no derivative works, where you can use the original image. You can use only the original image and not any images that have been derived from it. So most of the images and icons available on the web are licensed using the Creative Commons license. The license can restrict the use of an image to one or more of the conditions that you see listed here. The most common of these is attribution. There are stock photos that you can go and find, and sometimes they're free. Sometimes you can purchase them with a one-time fee, maybe as cheap as $1. Sometimes they're several $100s. You can also search, as I mentioned, for images and icons from Google or some kind of another kind of search engine. Here are some popular sites for images and for stock photos. For icons, more for stock photos. Finally, the last thing that's in here is a favicon. A favicon is a small image that appears in the left-hand side of the browser tab. It may also appear to the left of the URL in the browser's address bar. A favicon is typically anywhere from 16 to 20 pixels wide and 16 to 20 pixels tall, so they should be the same number. It has an extension of ICO, since that's the only one currently supported by Internet Explorer, and you can create an ICO file by using an ICO editor. And an ICO editor is a program that converts an image into an ICO file. Alright? And there are other ways to do it also. So this chapter was designed to give you what you need to know to get started using images, developing web pages that have images in them. As you can see, there's a lot involved. There's a lot of things to think about and a lot of things that you have to take into account. But by and large, once you've done it for a while, working with images is really not difficult. And it's, for lack of better words, it's very fulfilling just because of the fact that what it does is it adds things to a website that wouldn't be there otherwise. All right, here are a couple of the programs you can use in the end for favicons. All right, so that's it for another chapter. We've finished chapter 9. Get rid of some of these things that I've opened up here. And in the next chapter, which surprisingly enough is chapter 10, there is nothing here as far as what was provided in the book, but the chapter is on tables. It's a fairly short chapter, and I'll be back with that chapter in just a few minutes.